There were many things that led to and caused the Sand Creek Massacre. The story ends with a victory in many whites' eyes, until much later. When I first knew about this problem, it was 1862 and everything was very crazy. The issue was that the whites, including me, John Chivington, believed that the Indians were the ones in the way of the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 being held out. The Cheyenne and Arapaho and many other tribes just wanted peace between the whites and themselves. The so-called peace was established for a couple of years after many thought that the Treaty of Fort Wise had actually established that peace. After very few years, everyone finally noticed that there was a huge misunderstanding. This frustrating misunderstanding was brought to light when many of the leaders were not in agreement of the Treaty of Fort Wise, and they acted out. While the native people understood it as the agreement between the people who signed it and the whites believed that it included all of the Cheyenne and Arapaho people, expecting them to give up buffalo hunting and to move within the reservation boundaries. I was annoyed and frustrated that we had even agreed to this treaty because I knew that these treaties would never work out the way many people wanted. I believed that the Indians would just be killed, mainly because I thought that killing all the Indians and scalping them is the honorable and right thing to do. At this point, there were many tensions between the Indians and us. There were many raids by the Indians, and so many people had died, and it was not making me happy. The very first thing that ignited all of the other raids and hostilities was the murder of Chief Lean Bear. After the misunderstanding, the whites were frustrated, and they did not pay attention to the things the Indians had to show their intent of peace in that meeting. Instead of listening and looking at the things that the Indians had, the leader of the troops in that meeting decided to order the troops to fire at the Indians. This was the start of all the many raids and hostilities of the Indians. Behind gates, a white family were found brutally murdered by what seemed to be an Arapaho raiding party. There was a girl that was not yet 3 and a 5-month baby. They were killed along with their parents. This caused many to move into Denver for protection because it caused such a panic. In August of 1864, John Evans authorized the killing of any hostile Indians, and soon after he tells me to lead and help gather volunteers for the 3rd Volunteer Colorado Cavalry. November 29th is a remembered day. This day was when I led 700 men who lived in Denver. I hated Indians so much that I couldn't hate them any more than I already did, and most of the volunteers agreed with me. I saw that as I walked down this hill that many of the men saw the soldiers and ran. The women and children were asleep and were not able to see the soldiers, which is why most of the dead Indians were the women and children. Many of the soldiers, including John Chivington, were drunk, and they were fueled by their hatred and dislike of Indians to not pay attention to the fact that they were not hostile Indians, and they had an American flag up to prove it. Even after the killing started, an Indian put up a white flag and the soldiers ignored it. Right after the victory for us, we brought our trophies to Denver, where there were crowds of people cheering. In December of the same year, a man named Silas Soule wrote a letter. The letter was addressed to a Major Wynkoop, and it told him about the massacre in great detail. With my term of service expiring, I left Colorado and left the control of the 1st Colorado Cavalry to a guy named Thomas Moonlight, and he started an investigation of the massacre as well. About 142 years after the massacre, on the exact date of April 28, 2007, the land that the massacre was at was established the National Historic Site that many visit nowadays. It all ends with the fact that after the massacre, the Indians weren't in the way of the people anymore. They either left and ran when they saw the Indians that day, or they were killed in the massacre. But either way, they weren't in the way of the whites anymore. They were gone, and the problem that started it all was over because the Indians were either dead or left Colorado. Many say that my hatred for Indians fueled my need for vengeance, land, and the killing of all Indians. Me, as well as all of the other people in Colorado, were so happy, and our problems were solved because I decided to take control and lead the troops to do what the cavalry of men were put together to do. Sadly, it is a much bigger problem, and it wasn't just in Colorado. The battles were on the wanting of the land over the Great Plains, so for 26 more years there would be a battle to the death for the Great Plains, but for now the whites had the land and most of Colorado.